How John D. Rockefeller became the richest person ever. The name Rockefeller has been synonymous with American wealth for generations now. But how did the Rockefellers get their start? How did John D. Rockefeller go from the son of a con artist to an oil refiner to the wealthiest person in modern history? In this video, we'll be looking at how Rockefeller made his fortune. John Davison Rockefeller Sr. was born in 1839 to a large family in Richford, a small town in upstate New York. His mother was a religious man and his father was a traveling salesman who, according to a biography of Rockefeller, was known to have said, "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make them sharp." Not an easy childhood, perhaps, but a formative one. When John was young, the family moved to Moravia, New York, then Owego, New York, then finally Strongsville, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. As a young man, J.D. Rockefeller showed an early enterprising spirit, selling candy, raising turkeys, and otherwise doing jobs for their neighbors. He got a good education for the time. In the 1850s, only a little over half of all white children ages 5 to 19 were enrolled in any school at all. John attended Owego Academy. Then, when the family settled in Ohio, John attended high school in Cleveland. After graduating, he even attended Folsom's Commercial College where he took a 10-week business class, studying bookkeeping. From there, in 1855, at the age of 16, he became an assistant bookkeeper and office clerk at a Cleveland small produce commission firm called Hewitt & Tuttle. His first day of work was September 26th, a date which he would commemorate each year with a celebration in his adult life. In this first job, he made only 50 cents, around $14.75 in today's dollars, per day, so he continued to take other jobs on the side to make ends meet. After a few years at the firm, it became clear his bosses would not be willing to promote him or give him a substantial raise. So Rockefeller struck out on his own. He began his own competitor produce brokerage and, in 1859, joined with a partner named Maurice B. Clark, founding Clark & Rockefeller. Clark and Rockefeller studied together at Folsom's College, and in what would soon become an important twist of fate, Clark had been an oil driller. Together they raised $4,000 in capital, equivalent to $117,963.68 today, to start the business. They made money each year thereafter, trading in foodstuffs like meats and grains, a business which would boom during the American Civil War of the early 1860s. It just so happens that in 1859, the year they founded their new business, the first American oil well was drilled, just over 100 miles east of Cleveland in Titusville, PA. As the Civil War began to wind down and wartime profits began to slow, Clark and Rockefeller began looking into other ways to expand their business, particularly in oil. Rockefeller, being very concerned with risk management, wanted to avoid the potential losses of drilling for oil and instead decided to focus their business on oil refineries. Profits from refining oil may have been smaller, especially at the time, since the motor vehicle hadn't been invented yet, but were much more stable and predictable. In 1863, at the age of 24, Rockefeller joined with his partners to enter the new and booming oil business by buying a refinery in Cleveland. Rockefeller, Clark, Clark's two brothers, and a chemist named Samuel Andrews became Standard Oil of Ohio. Not content to simply refine oil into kerosene for lamps, Rockefeller put substantial efforts into research and development. Because of this, the company discovered uses for many of the byproducts of oil that had previously been discarded, including in paints and lubricants. Meanwhile, in 1864, Rockefeller met and married Laura Celestia Seddy Spellman, an abolitionist activist and the future mother of his 5 children, to whom he would remain married until her death in 1915. Rockefeller is quoted as having said of Seddy, "Her judgment was always better than mine. Without her keen advice, I would be a poor man." She was active in the Underground Railroad, and it is perhaps no little thanks to her that Rockefeller gave money to the Union cause in the Civil War and supported Abraham Lincoln for president. That said, Rumor has it he began giving to charities as early as his first job at the age of 16, giving money to the church and related charities from the get-go. So perhaps they got along because that kindly sentiment was always in his heart. In 1865, Rockefeller bought out all three of the Clark brothers at auction for $72,500, or about $1 million in today's currency, in what would later be considered a key move for his career. The company became Rockefeller and Andrews. Then, a year later, John's brother William Rockefeller Jr. also built a refinery in Cleveland and made John a partner. In 1867, they added American industrialist Henry Morrison Flagler to the company, and Rockefeller, Andrews, and Flagler, the predecessor to Rockefeller's biggest venture, Standard Oil Trust, was established. Within a year, in 1868, thanks in large part to Rockefeller's clever, if in some cases somewhat morally questionable, business move, heavy borrowing and investing, and rapid adaptation to the quickly changing oil industry landscape, they were the largest oil refinery in the world. The company, of which John was president and the largest shareholder, grew by buying out rival refineries and founding new companies worldwide. These global offices mainly focused on marketing and product distribution, both of oil and of the many new products they had developed from the byproducts of the refineries, like paraffin wax and petroleum jelly. They also had companies to build oil barrels and continue R&D for new products. By 1882, these various companies were merged into one and the Standard Oil Trust was formed. By this point, John D. Rockefeller was at the head of the company that refined as much as 90% of America's oil, but the process was not without strain. He clashed with other businesses, even as he absorbed many of them and brought on their leadership into key roles. His prominence and growing fortune, as well as his less conventional methods, like employing people across the country to keep tabs on what was happening in the industry, meaning sometimes spying on his competitors, drew attention and often ire from the public and the press. He was seen as a symbol for corporate greed and criticized for his methods. He commented that he often couldn't sleep through the night during this time. In 1890, what could have been disaster struck. The U.S. Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, a law which prohibits the creation and intentional preservation of monopolies that limit competition and trade in order to protect consumers from abuses by companies with too large a share of a market. Standard Oil was a prominent source of momentum for the antitrust movement, as their share was large enough to manipulate pricing and put pressure on other companies to comply to their will. While, when the act was first passed, it was primarily used to control the unions, it was ultimately used to break up Standard Oil's trust. And by 1892, Standard Oil of Ohio was separated from the rest of the company. It took until 1911 for the holding company that was then formed, Standard Oil of New Jersey, to be declared in violation of antitrust laws and dismantled. By that time, however, Rockefeller has retired. In 1901, he traded Standard's iron interests to J.P. Morgan in exchange for stock in U.S. Steel, and the following year, at the age of 63, he retired. Between investments and stocks still held in his own company, he made $58 million in just a year in 1902. He stayed on nominally as president until the 1911 breakup of the company, which was splintered into 34 companies. While, again, that could have been disastrous, it was in reality only more beneficial to Rockefeller and his ever-growing fortune, as he received proportionate shares to his then holdings in Standard Oil, 25%, in all 34 of those newly founded companies. While his control over oil industry may have lessened, the collective net worth of those companies was 5 times that of the original New Jersey holding company, and Rockefeller's wealth grew to $900 million. Those companies today have, in many cases, merged back together, and include some of the most valuable oil companies: ExxonMobil, Conoco, Chevron, and parts of BP. Throughout his life, Rockefeller was known to be religious, a devout Northern Baptist. He gave money to charity and the church, and in his retirement and older age, he made substantial and lasting gifts, establishing the Rockefeller Foundation, providing hefty support to the University of Chicago, giving major funding to the Atlanta Baptist Female Seminary in Atlanta for African American women, which became Spelman College, named for his wife, and many more substantial gifts. His funding led the way for the eradication of hookworm disease, which had plagued the American South, and he was known to give small change to adults and children wherever he went, poor or otherwise. All in all, he's said to have given about $550 million in his lifetime to various charitable causes, despite his reputation as greedy corporate business magnate. Ultimately, in the later part of his life, Rockefeller's assets were believed, conservatively, to be worth about 1.5% of the United States GDP, an equivalent value of about $340 billion today. For perspective, Jeff Bezos, the richest person in the world today, is worth a little more than a third of that. This makes him the wealthiest person in modern memory. He spent much of the next 40 years after his retirement living in Westchester, New York, where his family still owns an estate, and spent time in Florida in the winters near a hotel that had been set up by his Standard Oil co-founder Henry Morrison Flagler. John D. Rockefeller passed away in Ormond Beach, Florida in 1937 at the age of 97. Today, though he may have been known as a robber baron in his time, his legacy lives on as a philanthropist who believed both in making what money he could and in giving as much as he could, with a number of foundations and colleges that benefited from his charity. His family also made its mark on the lay of the land, still sitting at 24th on Forbes' list of wealthiest individuals and families. The family since John D. Rockefeller has produced policymakers and politicians as well as influential business people, and has made a few notable contributions to the Manhattan skyline at Rockefeller Center, constructed by his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr. So how can you apply the lessons of Rockefeller's rise to riches in your own quest for fame and fortune? He was ambitious, sometimes ruthless, but balanced with a philanthropic streak. But most importantly, when he saw an opportunity in a new and booming business, he took it, while managing his risk to limit potential losses. Instead of going for the flashy but risky career of oil driller, he saw that all drillers would need refiners, and built his fortune that way. You might not be able to build a monopoly like this, and for good reason. Both those lessons could help you on your path to business success. What do you think? Was John D. Rockefeller a hero or a crook? Would you have the courage to strike when the iron was hot and change your business's direction? Sound off in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing content like this.